Robert Kiyosaki, and this is our pre-launch for my book coming out. It's called The Capitalist Manifesto. And the reason, I've been working on this book for quite a while because in my opinion it's a very important book, but as I write about in Capitalist Manifesto, is I went to military school in New York, and I also had an economics teacher who had us study Marx, the Communist Manifesto, and then I flew in Vietnam fighting communists, and I actually saw what happens when communists take over our country. And my concern today is I see the same things happening throughout the world that happened like in Vietnam and in different parts of the country in the world. So the Capitalist Manifesto is to counter the Communist Manifesto written by a guy named Marx. So our guest today is a gentleman I met on the road. His name is Dan Campbell. He was born in California, so he's American, but at 2 years old he moved to South America, and he's had the good or bad fortune to travel much of the Spanish-speaking world and to discover or to witness what happens when socialism takes over rich countries. So I want to welcome to the program, Dan, and then would you mind, and then he gave me one of these, I'm now a millionaire. I always wanted to be a millionaire. It's 1,000,000 pesos. It's wonderful stuff. So would you mind giving us your background, Dan, and then, and then we're going to get into what warnings you have to people. What do you see happening in the world today that you saw happen in Argentina and South America?
Thank you, Robert. It's great being with you. Great seeing you again. It was an honor to meet you at the conference you and I were both at. Just excited to see things that are happening on the one side, because there's some wonderful people that see the truth, but sadly, too many people are drinking the Kool-Aid, if we said it that way. My folks were missionaries, so I grew up in South America, lived in Costa Rica, Colombia, Venezuela, and most of the time in Argentina. Argentina is very similar to the United States. The beautiful country, beautiful people. People came there from all different backgrounds and countries, immigrated there. So wonderful. The difference they had was they're more used to a dictatorial type of government. They lacked more of a moral underpinning, so corruption was rampant. The whole time was there, whether it was seen or unseen. And then it started back in the 50s when Domingo Perón took over. He was a colonel in the army, staged a coup. And then what started there was nationalizing all the private businesses. So the government ran everything. So it became politically driven. And then everybody that would come to power would put all their cronies in. And so not only was it corrupt, it was extremely inefficient. So to keep up with that, they started printing more and more money. Which happened when I was a kid. We had certain bills that were very European style. The larger the denomination, the larger bill. And then they got so much that they had to knock off 2 zeros. Then they started, because of inflation, putting out the new bills, and eventually came to the one that I gave you that you showed a minute ago, was the 1,000,000 peso bill. That's the bill there. So what had happened, I purchased a piece of property in about 1986 for the equivalent of that money, 1,000,000 pesos. And that was worth at that time, roughly $20,000. 4 years later, I was giving my friends all that same bill because I wanted them to be millionaires. I wanted to try to help them realize what inflation and hyperinflation did. That amount of money was now worth 6 cents. In 4 years, it had gone from
20,000 to 6 cents?
Exactly.
So let me ask this question real quickly.
Yes.
So we go back in time with what you were doing, and just recently, President Biden signed into like 1.9 trillion and 1.2 trillion?
Exactly, 1.9, I think.
When you see the U.S. government printing another trillion, what's a trillion here, a trillion there, and this is only 1,000,000,
right?
What goes through your head? How does your brain compute going back to Argentina and coming to America today?
Well, the inflation, because your dollar's worth less just since the first of the year, since he took over. Just look at gas prices. Here in California, I was paying 285 to 290. Right now, I paid 350 the other day. That's just in a short amount of time. They keep printing money, it's worth less. I was telling one of my students the other day, they came in and asked, I said, okay, so look at your dollar bill. When I was in college, I could buy 4 gallons of gas with that. Today, I can't buy a third of a gallon with it. Now, obviously, that's stretched over a larger period of time. But what has happened is as they print it, the value's less and the prices just go up a lot faster. And that's what we're going to see, I think, in the very near future.
You think we're going to see hyperinflation?
Definitely going to come close to that. For those of us old enough to remember the Carter years, we suffered inflation in those. And that was one of the same things. Most our young people today haven't experienced that, nor have they experienced the government trying to take over everything other than healthcare, which is what they're trying to do now.
So, the thing about Argentina, I mean, Buenos Aires has got to be one of the most gorgeous cities on planet Earth.
Absolutely.
And what's it like now? I mean, what's happening there? Do you have any friends there? They tell you what's going on?
Lots of friends. I was with one just 2 weeks ago. They are experiencing right now 57% inflation. Again, because socialists were elected, took over, the corruption sets in worse. There's always a certain level of corruption. I hate to say that, but things are very tough. It is very difficult to keep pushing forward because your salary or your income never keeps up with this kind of high-speed inflation. So it's absolutely beautiful city. The people are absolutely wonderful. You've met a lot of Argentine people, but the corruption and then the government just kills all of those things. So what I learned from there is something that you have taught is buying silver and gold, because you got to have something that maintains its value, because paper is worthless.
Well, thank you. It says right here in your letter to me, Capitalism versus Socialism, it says, we found out later that the national government leaders were stealing directly from the Treasury while continually printing money and raising taxes. They spent far more than what came in, but they gave free benefits to the poor, but they pocketed large amounts for themselves. Do you think that's going on here in America?
Definitely see the same thing happening. They were very creative. I had a colonel in the Army. He became a very good friend of mine, and later he changed his life because it was different than what he was doing before. What they did was they would go into, for example, they were going to do a public works. They're going to paint the government building, give it all a fresh look. They'd go to the paint company and say, you're going to donate $100,000 worth of paint, but you're going to sign a receipt as if we paid you. So they would take the 100,000 from the Treasury, keep that, but then they had a receipt from the paint company that said that they paid it. So they're very creative in those kind of things doing it. So they were doing that while they're lining their pockets. Then to keep the populace okay, they would give what we're experiencing today, stimulus checks, making people think they're getting free money.
Yeah. I was talking to this guy. I mean, he couldn't understand it's an American. I think it's 1.9 trillion or whatever it is. Yes. He was ecstatic. And the reason he was happy was he says, they're going to give me money. Why wouldn't I be happy? So to that, so I looked at him and says, but when you print that much money and you give it to poor people, does it do any good, Dan?
Well, it does something for the moment. There's instant gratification. That's why that man was happy.
Right.
But in the long run, you're losing money. They don't understand that, but what you have is worthless. One of my best friend's mother came to me. She was a widow. They had all their money. He'd worked for 40 years. They'd saved, they bought their house. They didn't know anything, had money in savings to take care of her when he passed away. She had taken that all out of the bank. And she said, could you buy me dollars? She kept it all in pesos all this time. And I almost cried, Robert, because when I exchanged it for, it was $163. That was it. Inflation had totally eaten it away. There used to be an English newspaper, I think it's closed now, in Buenos Aires, that their stories were hilarious. One of the satires was, please send your money to us, we will invest it in the bank, and you will get 75% interest return on it. What they didn't tell you was inflation was 100 to 125% that month. So it sounded like a really good deal. You're getting 75% interest, but you're constantly losing money.
And then in your letter here, you talk about, I think it's called censorship. It says, as a child in Argentina, I clearly remember my school teacher being upset because the police were arresting local newspaper reporters because they were reporting the corruption. So what can you say about that?
Well, it sounds exactly like what we experience right now, where especially if you're conservative, you're being censored, or you're saying they say what you are saying is not true, and we are renaming things. We give them different names. So whether they cut you off of Facebook, Google, Twitter, Instagram, whichever one, they're doing the exact same thing. They just name it different. It reminds me, you probably read it too, back in high school, George Orwell's book, 1984, where all they did was rename, change the history. That's exactly what they're trying to do today.
So when you saw Trump get deplatformed, I mean, he's the president of the United States.
Yes.
He gets taken off of Twitter, they shut him down and all this. So I think people ran to another place called Parler. I'm not techie. They shut them down too. Silicon Valley shut down the president of the United States.
Yes.
And Parler pops up. They take that guy out, one of that company. What were you thinking? Because, I mean, when you see that, that was just last year.
Yes. I never thought I'd see this in the United States, Robert, to be honest, but we've become a banana republic. As we have so many of these others, it's like third world, where a very small group of elite fight for control, and they control the media. They shut everybody else down, so no other voices can be heard. We used to go, at least this was when I went to college, where you may not agree with somebody, but it was open so you could hear different points of view. Now it's the one you want or you're shut down. You know, the old saying, my way or the highway. So very similar to what has happened to us in Argentina. Same thing is happening, or has happened, continues to happen today in Venezuela. That is probably one of the saddest things of today, what they've done to the people there. I talked to my friend there the other day, and he said to go to McDonald's to just get a simple hamburger costs 2 months' salary. It's just, they've ruined the country. And that was one of the wealthiest countries in South America as well. No reason for it to be that way either.
So it's a really touchy question. You don't have to answer it. When you saw the election of Donald Trump, or the unelection, do you think it was rigged? Don't have to answer it.
No, I'm happy to answer that. I think there was enough inconsistencies that the Supreme Court should have at least heard the evidence. Whether there was enough to change the thing or not, I don't have that evidence. But if it is true that those machines were plugged into the internet, which a lot of affidavits say they were, then I would never trust those machines, especially if it's true that they designed them to work in Venezuela, because I know all those elections were rigged down there. So in my mind, but I don't have the evidence, nor am I the expert, it definitely deserved to be studied. And there's no question in my mind that they did everything they could to get him out of office.
And then we have this guy, Obamacare. And, you know, I mean, what's more important than health care? But what happened to health care when the socialists or communists took over Argentina?
It creates a two-tiered system immediately. Everybody's covered, which is a good thing. So they get the very basics, so everybody's got health care. But your quality drops down to the lowest common denominator, which is really sad. And then there's no incentive for people to progress, to advance, to do more work because everybody gets paid the same. So when I was in Cuba, one day I was going to a meeting, so took a taxi. I always love talking to the taxi drivers because they know everything that's going on. So I find out the gentleman that was driving us was a neurosurgeon.
Right, right.
I was shocked. I said, "What are you doing driving a cab?" And he said, "I make more money in one day driving a taxi than I do in a whole month as a neurosurgeon."
I had the same experience in Beijing, China. My taxi driver was a medical doctor, and I said the same thing. It says, "I make more money driving a taxi."
Yes.
Why?
Yes.
What is it? Because why was that? I mean, what was going on in Argentina?
Well,
Or
because they
Cuba?
feel that equity, whatever the word that's in vogue at the time, is the solution to everything. So everybody gets the same treatment. Well, everything should be fair, but there's got to be stuff to incentivize people to do stuff. So my wife was pregnant with our third child, and I took her to the doctor's office. We get there, and the attendant says, "I'm sorry, the doctors won't be in today." I said, "Why, has he got emergency? Is he hospital?" He says, "No, he quit practicing." I said, "What do you mean?" Well, then when I found out, he and his brother put a bakery in because he could make more money because of the socialized medicine. Everybody got paid the same, no matter how many surgeries or how good you were or what you did. So baking bread was more profitable, and he could feed his family that way. So it ruined and it took out some of the best minds and medical folks in that area because they wouldn't get paid. They got paid the same as a day laborer who's out just, and I don't mean this bad, but all he could do is run a shovel.
So when I met you at this conference we were at not that long ago, I told you about this friend of mine in Argentina, and he was a bird boy. You know, a bird boy is, I'm a hunter, so I go down there and I was shooting doves and all this. Right. And I said, "What did you do before?" And he says, "Oh, I was an electrical engineer. I had a whole company." And he said he had $1 million US in the bank in Argentina. And when he walked into the bank, they says, "Congratulations, we've converted your dollars to pesos."
Yes.
Did you hear stories like that?
It happened to me. So at one time they said you could have, of course, you always can have an account in pesos, then you can have one in dollars as well, because they wanted people to keep their money there. So there was 1 month, and I forget what year it was, they couldn't make their payment to the Federal Monetary Fund, whoever it is they borrowed money from, the government could. So they froze everybody's account. You had money in the bank, but you couldn't touch it for 6 months. So basically, when I was able to touch my money, it was worth maybe 1/4 of what it went in. So yeah, they have the power to do that. Well, there was no way to stop them, I should say. There was no way you could get your money. So then the other thing that they did, Robert, which was interesting, they would set the official exchange rate. For example, 10 pesos to the dollar. That's just an arbitrary number the government set, but that wasn't what the market yielded. And at times, what the official was, say 10 to 1, what was going on where you could really get dollars was 20, 25, 30 to 1. So it was artificially maintained, and it led to all kinds of corruption within the government itself. It was corrupting itself. So it is very, very, very sad.
And so today you still live in California, you know, and I left California probably 30 years ago. The reason I left California was because since I'm international, doing business all over the world, right. California started taxing my worldwide income. So I moved to Arizona because they only tax me on income I make in Arizona, but not worldwide. And how long are you planning to stay in California?
Oh, that is a very good question. My wife asked me about that. Matter of fact, when we were in Texas, that time when you and I were at one of those conferences, we went and looked at places back there. That's a possibility. For right now, I got more than I know what to do with right here. So, but if something doesn't change, you know, right now there's a recall on the governor. I know that won't change everything, but that might help a little bit. I don't know, Robert. If it keeps going the way it is a very, very sad day.
So what words of wisdom or warning would you have for people today who are, who, like my friend and I, when we were down hunting in Argentina, and I talked to my friend who was an electrical engineer, they took his whole company and they took his bank account.
Yes.
And all my friends said to me, that'll never happen in America.
Right.
When you hear people say that, what do you say?
They're very naive. It could happen here. We've seen where our government here in California has taken people's property, and for whatever excuse they had, and some of them it's taken 10 years, they haven't got it back yet. They've taken money out of their accounts, accused them falsely, using their powers and overstretched. So what I'm saying is, not to the extent that happened in Argentina, but some of that's already happening here right now. And we've seen evidence of that. And sadly, if it gets reported, it gets in the back pages of the paper, or it doesn't really show up on your internet blog or wherever you get your news from. So my advice is to be very wise. You've counsel people not carry debt in certain areas. Make sure you have it in the right place. Make sure you have the means so that you can survive. So that's my thing. And get somewhere where the government is much better. The other thing I said is, I would never vote for a socialist, which is just a nice way of saying communist, in my entire life. I would be very careful and talk to as many family members as you could. Say, you got to change, because this is not going to happen. This isn't the way our country was founded. And if all you have to do is look around the world, because there's not one single example where socialism or communism has worked. The only thing that saved China, and this is my opinion, is they turned somewhat to capitalism to start going, because after they took over back in the late 40s, everybody was living in poverty except for the elite. And the only reason they've come around, even though they're still communists, is they've adapted a portion of capitalism. Novel idea, right, Robert? So getting people to open their eyes, it's not going to stay the same, and there is no such thing as free money.
So if somebody in Argentina had held gold or silver and they got it out of the country, they'd be better off, wouldn't they?
Oh, by far, by far. That's the easiest way. Go back hundreds of years. That's how people did that. We were that way when we were on the gold standard. That's how we knew that our money was worth, because it was backed by gold, until Roosevelt and then later Nixon took us totally off of that. And it's been downhill ever since, if you ask me.
What I thought was interesting about California was when COVID first broke out, they have a picture of a guy who was on a stand-up paddleboard at Santa Monica Beach, and they arrested him for not social distancing. The guy's on a paddleboard.
Yeah, it's the epitome of stupidity. Yeah, anyway. Yeah. I got stopped at the grocery store the other day by the masked police.
The masked police?
Yeah, well, that's what I call it. One lady in the store just totally flipped out because my mask had dropped down to about here on my nose. And she just went off. I said, these poor people. And nobody listens. Even Dr. Fauci back in the beginning said masks don't do any good. Yeah. So, but anyway, it's called control, in my opinion.
So, well, thank you for the time, but any final words to people how they can prepare for what you think might be coming, or if we go like Argentina or Peru or Brazil or Ecuador, I mean, it's coming, or Cuba.
Well, the 20 plus, or counting my childhood, almost 40 years that we lived overseas, a couple things we always did. We had non-perishables, so we could survive, live, if everything shut down, for at least 2 weeks.
So
I've stretched that out a little further. Not to go crazy, but to have things, because what if everything shut down like it did when they closed the country down for COVID? We've experienced that just a year ago. I've never seen how the whole world shut down in a day. So have those. I still keep some cash because I'm old school, but have it because you got to have something to barter with if everything would close down. I have gold and silver coins. So if I needed to exchange something to trade with somebody, because if the whole system shut down, as it could, as it did in Texas when all the power went out after they thought everything was going to work. So don't just depend on your plastic, because that may not work. And I try to take care of those things so that my wife and I are taken care of. We have the basic necessities handy, and just be wise. I used to say use common sense, but very few people have that anymore, Robert. It just the simple things that people don't. I go, I would think everybody would think about that,
Right.
but they don't.
Correct.
So just have yourself prepared, because what would happen if the government confiscated your bank account? What would you do?
I understand.
Those thoughts. I don't like being negative, but I've had that happen to us living overseas. So you have to be prepared. We had national shutdowns in every country I lived in. So thus we were prepared. So we have food in the house. We had funds available that we could access. It wouldn't take us forever, but it would cover us for a short period of time to make sure those happen. And in California, it's good to do that because we have earthquakes around here, and the earth tends to rattle and roll. So if something like that, a disaster were to happen, you're prepared. Just simple things. It's not rocket science, and you don't have to do it all at once, but you can prepare yourself and be well set up for that.
Well, thank you. So Dan, thank you for contributing to my little capitalist manifesto here and preparing people. It's like my friend said, that he's from Poland, he's 50 years old, and he says young people don't even know that they're welcoming communism.
Exactly.
They don't know that they're saying, please help us. Everything's got to be fair, everything's got to be equal, everybody's going to get everything for free. And we see the same thing happening here.
Exactly. And that's the trap that lures them in.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for the $1 million. I won't spend it all in one place.
You are more than welcome.
Okay. Thank you,
Thank
Dan.
you, Robert. It's been great sharing with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for watching. And then we have special offers coming up for you. But this is not a time to be saying it'll never happen in America, because it is happening today. Thank you.